So, Paul, I'm back.
Where have you been?
Well, I've not been invited.
I'm
I'm
sure.
only joking. I'm only joking.
So I have to come in there.
Separate us. Yeah.
I've brought a very special guest today.
Who have you brought?
I've brought my mammy.
Oh.
Well, she was out with me, and I thought I'll bring her along to a podcast to talk about.
She actually told me we were going to a wine bar.
So I've brought my mammy with me to talk about intergenerational trauma.
Wow.
So I thought she'd be the best person to talk about that.
It was really light-hearted up to
It
that
was
point.
really light-hearted. I just thought I'd drop
Who brought you along?
the bombshell.
Why
no
did you
pun-
come back?
No pun intended. So I'll let my mum introduce herself a little bit. Maybe it'll make more sense to the listeners as to why I've invited her along.
Perfect, yeah.
Well, I'm Maeve's mummy, as she said, and my name's Mary O'Boyle. And I have to say O'Boyle here because if I say Mary O'Boyle, they say Muriel Boyle. So
Is that your accent?
it's my accent.
I thought it was Muriel.
No. So did the airlines in Tasmania, funny enough. So I was born in Belfast. And then I came to Scotland 35 years ago. My husband got a job over here and I've never left since.
Scotland, 35 years.
35 years, yeah.
So, are you Scottish now?
I've lived here longer than I lived in Northern Ireland, so
Okay.
I suppose I've got double heritage.
And what age were you when you came over?
I was 27, got on 27, yeah.
So
I was expecting Maeve
I
when
always
come
say I
over.
was made in Ireland but born in Scotland.
Mm-hmm.
My mum was 4 months pregnant with me.
Not quite. Yeah, something around that anyway, yeah.
When mum came here with
When we
me.
came over, so.
And that was a brave move, or just something that you had to do as a couple? Like, was it a conscious thing, or was it just a let's go?
Oh no, we had to do it. We had to do it. But we well, funny enough, Glasgow was always known as the city where all these knife crimes were going on. And I remember Lawrence's dad saying, "Why do you want to move to Glasgow?" And he said, "I don't want my children brought up in a sectarian country." Okay. so it's sort of the better half of two evils, I suppose. But no, he was I guess growing up in Northern Ireland as a child, I never saw the trauma in it. I was too young to feel that. And it was only when I started working and got married and in relationships, and we left in 1987 when all the sort of assassinations were happening. So there was a bit of fear going out at night because there was all these random shootings and of innocent, well, there's all innocent people that died, but all these random shootings. So you weren't sure what part of the city was safe anymore. During the 70s growing up, it was riots, so, and you knew you stuck to your own side. You stuck to your own side of the fence and you sort of knew where to go and who to talk to. And it's really weird because we had our own taxi service and we had our own bus service, and you didn't veer outside your own side of town. But like I say, I was only 8 when the Troubles started. For me, the Troubles had been going on for years previous to that in the 1950s and whatever. So, but I didn't see any of that. I was only 8 when it started. So for me to realise that there was trauma involved in this, it wasn't until I became, like I say, a teenager, going to work, having a relationship, getting married, that things were happening around us that we thought we have no control over this and we don't want. I certainly didn't want my children brought up in that. My parents, I would say, were the bravest people on earth because they kept us all safe. They were brought up. My mum came into the world sort of the tail end of World War II, and my dad. So they had seen conflict as well around the world happening, as well as their own country. And they didn't want that for their children either. So my dad used to do a head count every night. And my brother was 18. His girlfriend lived 2 doors down from us. And my dad would go down and say, "Have you no home to go to? Get up the road. There's trouble." And we would all be there. and we'd all be head counted.
Imagine that though, like trying to like do a head count of your own children every night.
Yeah, it
making
was.
Sure they were all in.
Yeah.
And
even the dog.
We laugh sometimes because you'll say, even the dog, but we laugh sometimes because you'll say, okay, it was a wee bit of trouble. Or when we have family, barbecues, or we've got the whole family around, it's like, oh, it was a wee bit of trouble. It was just a wee bit of trouble. And it's always that just brush off kind of humour that's around what was really a civil war, if you think about it.
It became very much the gallows humour. You had to sort of see some sort of humour in it to get through it. And I would dearly love if anybody out there knows who called it the Troubles, who came up with that name. Mm-hmm. Because like you say, it was a civil war. It was people fighting with each other and fighting different parts of the country. So, but it was also a guerrilla war because there was no winners.
Yeah.
Somebody was always going to pick up the gauntlet and run with it. So there was never going to be an end to it, really.
So we share a little in common. So my dad was born in Belfast.
All right.
And I have vague recollections, and they are really vague. But you talked about staying on, your own side. I definitely remember being in a cab, and we were travelling across Belfast, and I remember I had to then get under the coat or something because we were going through a particular area. And I didn't really understand it at the time, and why, like, is this a game? Are we playing a game? Or and it only came to light when, I was older that I processed it. But I think that was like a tiny peephole into the depths and murkiness of what was going on. And you're right, nobody won.
No.
No. And it's such a shame. So, like, because you were able to process it later on, is that where you felt most of the hurt then? Because all of a sudden it was real now, it was tangible.
Yes, and you're talking about going through different parts of the city and having to stay on your own side. And Maeve knows what story I'm going to tell. When Maeve and Connor were younger, we took them to France on camping holidays, quite a few years in a row. And my father-in-law lived in a mixed area. Well, just to sort of go back, a step back on that. When we got married, we lived in a mixed area.
Okay.
And not too far away from my husband's dad. But there was a part of the area that you had to go through, and coming up to the 12th of July, the pavements were painted red, white and blue. And, so we had been in France, World Cup that year.
Yeah.
France won.
Yeah.
So we came home and came off the ferry, we're driving up through the area, and my son is looking out, and I could see his wee brain ticking over. And he went, Dad, he says, is this where all the French people live? I mean, yes, this is exactly where the French people live. So forever and a day, that was known as the French quarters. Because my children, they didn't know that, the difference between that. And even when I was growing up, my mum and dad I'm a Catholic, right? Brought up a Catholic. My mum and dad had friends who weren't.
Yeah.
But they were always in and out of our house, and no harm came to them. But it was very far and few between the people did that. You never knew who did that. Right. You never knew what neighbours had friends of the opposite religion. Nobody talked about it. Yeah. So, so we'd always known that as the French quarters, and that's what it became. So I've digressed now. I can't even remember what I'm talking about here.
In terms of like when you were processing it, did you feel a gear shift in how you processed and felt what you'd been through in that time, and what I guess friends, colleagues, loved ones had been through as well? Like, did it kind of suddenly hit you, or actually was time the processor for you, and there wasn't a kind of a brick wall where suddenly, you were hit and processing it?
Yeah, I think just different events sort of came. It's shocking to say, Paul, but at the very beginning, when I realised what was actually happening in my city, my country, there was that shock element and that sort of anger and bitterness that was felt. And then the more it went on, you became very blasé about it all, and that's shocking.
That's shocking, yeah.
You know, people, when you heard the first bomb going off, you know, people were sort of like hysterical about it. And, oh my God, you know, they don't go down that road. There's this, that. And then you used to walk by and, you know, you'd hear a bomb going off and you, oh, wonder where that was, you know. And it's the strangest.
Almost normalised.
It was normalised, and it's a horrible way to sort of think of things, but it happens everywhere. You know, now even you have all these shootings in schools in America, and at first it's, oh my God, you know, what's happening in these schools? Now people think, oh, that's America. You know, so, and that's just expected now, which is not right, you know, because it's normalising the trauma, and people then find it more difficult to deal with it because that's part of their life, you know, and so me growing up there, we had a very strong family bond. My dad kept his family very safe, my brothers and my sisters, and the gallows humour came in. You know, you learn to deal with it. I mean, when the bombs used to go off and the windows were blowing in, you'd always get somebody making a joke about it, or, you know, my sister would pull up the blind and shout 2 fish suppers and a hamburger and close the blind again, you know. But this was just how people coped. And it's the humour that got a lot of people through that.
Yeah.
You know,
and I
there's...
think you talk a lot about what happened, your experiences with the family. You're always talking about it. There isn't a conversation where you have together where there's not conversation, and I think you always say that to me whenever there's something going on. Talk about it. You know, even if you're journaling or you're talking to yourself in the mirror, talk about it. Talk about what's happening. There's no secrets about it.
No, that's what sort of, as I got older, that has been my therapy. That's where I can talk about it. And people, whenever you were in Belfast, if someone asked me where I lived was the Falls Road, which was all Catholic. But if I went somewhere with my friends to a dance on the other side of the town and somebody asked me where I came from, I would say the Antrim Road, because that's mixed.
Right.
So you'd never know.
Yeah. And it's safe.
And it's a safe. No, you can't. You can't say, oh, she's a Catholic, she's a Protestant. Yeah. And but and that's just the way it was when you were brought up. You had to sort of lie about things and to protect yourself. And I remember even when I came here and started working, people would say, oh, what part of Ireland do you come from? Belfast? Oh, what part of Belfast? And I'd find myself going...
almost frozen.
Yeah. And then I thought, do you know Belfast? Not really. Number one, why are you asking? Yeah. But number two, I was able then to say without fear, I came from the Falls Road. But there's always that mentality with people from Northern Ireland, maybe not so much now, but when I was growing up in the 70s, there was the slogans of loose lips sink ships. You know, you can't speak out of turn, you know, and you had to watch your P's and Q's. And that was just for everybody, not just for me. Yeah. And that wasn't just for the Catholic areas. That was from the Protestant people as well too, because they were hemmed in by it all too. You know, and there was a peace wall. I mean, you might as well have called it the Berlin Wall, you know, because that separated two parts of the city.
It's so funny when you're talking about, you know, explosions going off. You're talking about walls being up. It's almost like we're talking about a movie, right? A feature film. Yeah. It's like that can't have been real. And actually, it really wasn't many years ago, was it?
No.
And it was very real.
No.
So I've got maybe a bit of a deeper meaningful, but you experience anything in life, and we're talking about the Troubles.
Yeah.
But you experience anything, and I think there's this, I don't know whether you agree with me or disagree with me, I think there's a point where you're an external part of the thing that you're experiencing. So you're kind of, you're on the sidelines, you're kind of assessing it,
outside looking in.
Yeah.
But then there's a point that you potentially cross where actually you become the experience. And that, I think, is a potentially, not always, but a potentially kind of dangerous place to be in terms of it consumes you.
Yeah.
Right. And now you've kind of lost who you were because you're now part of the experience. And we're not just talking about the Troubles. We could be talking about anything, right? So, you know, watching football for fun and then, you know, transitioning over years into becoming, a hooligan or something, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
And now you're
Yeah.
in it, and before you were just on the side looking at it, right? And so there's a danger, I think, and a cross point. Based on what I know about my dad's family and experience, I think certainly some people crossed from looking at it from the outside into being a part of it, right? And it doesn't mean they were part of it, but it means it consumed them.
Yeah.
And that might have been through loss, bereavement, experience, trauma, anything, but it was now a part of them. And that's the shame that I think, genuine shame and sadness when that happens in a negative sense.
Yeah.
You can also spin it and say there's lots of experiences where you can become part of it in a positive way as well.
Yeah.
But then you become almost one-dimensional. So I just wonder whether you feel like you were able to stay separated from, the depths of it all. And
If I hadn't have had the parents that I had, yes, I think there could have been a very different road that I could have went down, because there were neighbours and people that I knew whose families did go down that route, who did become consumed and bitter about the whole thing, and didn't lead a very nice life. Actually, some of them probably are away now. But if I hadn't have had my parents' guidance on that, yes, my brothers could have went down a very different road.
Yeah.
And even my sisters and myself. So that's why I say I think my parents were the bravest people in the world.
And a lot to be thankful for,
Yeah.
I guess.
Right? They had 6 children who never brought trouble to their door. Who were never in trouble. We weren't, honest.
But I think that's also reflective in my parents as well, that wasn't passed down to my brother and I either, because it could have easily, my parents had to leave Northern Ireland because of the troubles, because of all the sort of fighting that was going on, the assassinations that were going on. That sort of bitterness and anger could have been passed down to my brother and I, and it wasn't.
Yeah.
My dad bought us Irish history books. He was very encouraging of us to know both sides of the story, to know what was actually going on.
Yeah.
And both my brother and I, are not, sectarian or bitter or any of those things that we could have been.
Yeah.
So, it could have easily gone the other way had that, the generational passing
So
down.
I was going to say, so do we feel like it seems like that intergenerational trauma may have been avoided in each case through the generations, or so
I wanted to ask that question actually, because I think that's an interesting question. So I read a study where they had it's an American study where they had this group of mice, and they exposed them to cherry blossoms, the smell of cherry blossoms. But every time they did that, they electrocuted them. They gave them like electric shocks, so that every time that they smelled these cherry blossoms, they would associate the smell of cherry blossoms with pain.
Yeah.
And then these mice had children, and what they discovered that these children of these mice also feared the cherry blossoms, even though they didn't have the electric shocks.
Association.
It was just the genetic sort of the DNA pattern.
Yeah.
And I thought that was really interesting that we passed down our DNA. And I wondered what Mum would say if I said to her, what do you think you've passed down to, my brother and I in terms of intergenerational trauma or just DNA or...
Well, the thing that I think when Maeve and Connor were growing up, and Maeve will be the first to say this, I never allowed them to have a gun. If it wasn't blue and green and shot water at you, you weren't allowed it. A cap gun, nothing. And I actually remember being in a shop. We were going down to pick your dad up. And you wanted a cap gun. And I said, absolutely not. No way. And the guy behind the counter gave me a hard time because I wouldn't let her have a gun. And I said, when you come from where I come from, you wouldn't let your children have guns either. And he never said anything. But
yeah, we weren't allowed guns as kids.
No.
No.
Unless it was brightly coloured and shot water at you, there was no way you were getting it.
Yeah.
And your dad actually wanted a gun. I began to worry about her wanting a gun, but he made her a wooden one. They wouldn't shoot.
I worry about them
more than guns. Yeah, I know. I have to live with her, Paul, so I have to be nice.
I'm so sorry.
So, but she, so her dad made her a wooden gun, And he said to her brother, would you like a wooden gun? He went, no, I want a sword. And I thought, oh, dear God, we've got from guns to
What have we
swords. What have we raised, you know?
But even
But
football
that's...
shirts. Growing up,
No,
we weren't allowed football shirts either.
absolutely no.
No, so
No,
when my
no.
brother saved
No.
up to buy his first football
Well,
shirt.
that was your dad's fault.
Right.
When
That
he
was your
16,
dad's
I think
fault.
he was 16.
You know, he's a bit younger than that. I didn't approve of young children going about with football shirts in the town. Call me a snob, call me whatever you want. And I detested the fact that then a lot of the football stuff had drink logos on them,
Yes.
like for drinks company.
Yep.
And I thought, no. So Connor wanted a football strip. And I said, no, you're not getting one. You're not old enough to get one. And his dad said to him, when you have the money to buy us a football strip, you can get one.
And he said,
And what happened? It came to his birthday and he had the money to buy one.
yeah, so he bought one.
So we couldn't. But if I was going out with them, they weren't allowed to wear them.
No.
I said no.
There was
absolutely
connotations with that stuff, right? And there still is today,
Yeah.
isn't
Yeah.
there? Which is
Yeah.
sad. And funnily enough, you talk about their alcohol sponsors now. Exactly the same problem with gambling now,
Yeah.
right? And now they're regulating gambling. You know, like how many times do you have to go through something and figure out the answer and not change?
Yeah.
Yeah.
You know, it's ridiculous.
I just thought these kids are running around with these slogans on them. I mean, don't get me wrong. I like a drink in it, but I'm not going to run around with somebody's T-shirt with their name on it. You know, I think to ask a child to sponsor that,
That's wrong. Yeah.
it's very wrong. You know, so
how was the transition then from, because you're only young,
yeah,
from Belfast to Glasgow? Did it go as well as you'd hoped? Was it smooth? Was it just a new experience, or were there particular challenges in it? I mean, obviously you had one particular challenge.
Well, I was expecting me, and I did it twice. I never learn, you know. I just no. So, but when we came to Glasgow, I remember I had to go down. I asked my husband to drop me off in the town. Just drop me off in the town. I'll be fine. And I got lost. And I had no idea how to get home. And I had to phone him and I was in tears. You know, I'm lost. And he was furious, but later on he understood.
Yep.
He understood where. So the next time I thought, I'm going to get a bus into town. And I had a very good neighbour, I must admit. We rented her son's house and she was from Donegal.
Oh.
So she got me in touch with a doctor because I had no idea where the doctors were.
Yeah.
And she put me in touch with a doctor, and because I was pregnant, and then she told me what bus to get home and to get into the town. So after that, it was just plain sailing. After that, but the Scottish people are like the Irish people. They just, you know, the humour's the same. You know, we don't. I just think we're just the same. We're Celts.
Yeah.
We're all Celts at the end of the day. So,
Yeah.
And then I met my friend. I'd had Maeve. And I came home to find this present on the door, and it was my next door neighbour. Well, my neighbour across the street.
Yeah.
And we've been friends ever since.
Oh, that's a nice
35
story.
years,
That's a
yeah.
nice story.
Yeah. She's my Scottish auntie.
She's Scottish auntie.
Yeah,
Very
everyone's got a
nice.
Scottish auntie, you know.
Yeah, and we're going to grow old disgracefully.
Yeah.
You know, so.
Good. That's the way to go out, isn't it? That's the way to
Yeah,
go
we're
out.
going to get expelled from the nursing homes.
So I'm really interested, Mum, in you've been through this trauma, the conflict in Ireland, came to a new country. What has been recovering from trauma like, or are you still recovering from trauma? Is it an everyday process? Have you even thought about recovery from trauma? Has it even entered your head? Because I know it's been, you know, quite a blasé thing. That was your words, quite blasé. Have you even thought about recovery? I know some people who've been through what you've been through, you know, actually enter, you know, professional therapy to deal with what you've been through. But
I call it wine.
Wine?
No, well, when you say that now, we were in Belfast. Actually, I'm going to step back. There's certain things that trigger things in me. I can sail through it all, and I'm quite an easygoing person. I think some people might say differently, and I think as the years have gone by, I've become more sort of relaxed and things, more mellow.
Yep.
But we were watching a program. I'm not sure whether I'm allowed to mention the name of the program.
Go for it.
Okay. It was called
Trigger Point.
Trigger Point.
Okay.
Did you watch it?
I have not watched it.
Very good show.
Okay.
But in the first, it's the girl from Line of Duty that was in it.
All right.
And the first episode, there was a van exploded unexpectedly to us. And that
was a trigger.
That was a trigger.
Yeah.
That sort of really gave me a huge flashback. And I'm thinking, and I thought, I don't know whether I can watch this anymore or not. But we did. And it was, once I knew what was going to happen, and this is the whole thing, it was the shock of it. It was the sort of unexpectedness of it. And that was fine. So things like that. I can't watch documentaries about Northern Ireland. I find them very difficult because there is a lot of... I knew people who were killed and I knew people who were injured and who were affected physically and mentally very badly by the Troubles. And I just find sometimes they don't get it right. The reporters just don't get it right. And I just think, I can't do this.
It makes you angry, right?
It does make me... It annoys me that their stories aren't getting out there properly.
Yeah.
And they're romanticising it and making it something that it wasn't. I can watch silly programs like the Dairy Girls, and I love the Dairy Girls, and I love silly programs like that, but I don't like things that aren't factually true, you know, and even the funny ones, I'll get frustrated because they have the police driving around in these super duper cars, which didn't happen, or they'll take you down a street that's not there, you know, and you think, geographically it's just, So, but then, so things like that do it to me. And we went to Belfast a couple of weeks ago.
We did, yeah.
I've always been to Belfast to look after my mum, to see my mum, my father-in-law. I've never really done the touristy things that people do in Belfast. Didn't go to see the Titanic. I know how it ends. I'm just sorry. I'm not going to see it. No. So, but we decided to do the graveyard tour.
Yep.
And there's 2 graveyards in Belfast. There's the Milltown, well, there's loads of graveyards, but the 2 particular ones are the Milltown Cemetery, which is more to do with the Republican side of things, where my parents are buried, my grandparents are buried. And I thought, I don't want to do that one because I know what's in there, you know, so we'll do the City Cemetery one, which when I was growing up was the Presbyterian graveyard.
Okay.
And you were never allowed into it. The gates were always closed. And I didn't realise up until recently that there was a Catholic section of it and there's a Jewish section of it as well. So so we did that tour and it was really, really interesting and lots of stuff was brought out and you thought, I didn't know that. And
so one of the most interesting things about the City Cemetery tour is that they built a 9-foot wall underneath the cemetery to section off the Catholics and the Protestants and the Jews. And it's only in Ireland, only in Belfast would that happen. It was such a fascinating tour of Belfast history and the people that were buried there. Some really famous people buried there.
Yeah, it was more to do with the sort of like Victorian side of Belfast, where like you had the big merchants like Gallagher's cigarette factory and the bakeries and
things like that.
Harland
Really
and Wolff and all things like this, and you had your monuments to the Spanish flu victims.
But that trip was really about rewriting your history a bit.
It was because I never knew all the part. Irish history was banned in a lot of Catholic schools when I was growing up, and I think it was maybe the year or something before I left school that it was brought back in. But all they wanted to talk about was the Troubles, and I thought, we're living through it. Why do you want to talk about it? Yeah. If we're going to learn about Irish history, I want to learn from way back. Everything, you know. And that's why when Maeve was interested in it, we bought her the book and said, this is what you're going to learn from beginning to end. Anyway, so that was a really interesting tour for me because I never knew half the things that were going on. My grandmother lived opposite the City Cemetery, and the guy who was doing the tour was saying there used to be a bell at the front gate at the Catholic end and the Jewish end. And they rang the bell like a hospital visiting time, and that was it. They were closing the gates. And I said, so what happened to the bells? He went, they stole them and sold them. Okay, if it's not nailed down, you know, that's it, you know. So, and then the next day we went to the Crumlin Road jail, which is a very famous jail in Belfast, and it had a tunnel from the jail over to the courthouse, where they used to march the prisoners through.
Yep.
And that was opened in the 1800s or whatever. And going through that was a really, really good tour. And the guy that was doing it was really, really good. But Maeve couldn't go into the execution chamber. It was a bit traumatic. Yeah. The girl that was Shona that was with us said, "Are you okay?" And I said, "Yeah." She said, "You look a bit traumatized." I said, "No, it's a glass floor. I don't like glass floors." No. So I had to walk around it, So when I went outside, there was 2 army vehicles there. There was a big tank, which was called the Saracen, and there was another 4-wheeler, which they used to call it the Pigs. And they used to roar up and down our road. And the minute I saw them, I thought, oh my God. And she said to the guy, "I told you, my mum's going to get a flashback from this." And it was. And I just, this thing came into my head. I remember sitting in the house one night and we were watching Jack the Ripper, of all things, the original, and there was a shooting in the street. There was a crossfire between 2 foot patrols who didn't know one was walking one way and one was walking the other, and a sniper opened fired. So they were shooting at each other, basically, and the bullets come through our window. So I dived on the floor. I do naturally, I don't want to get shot. Dived to the floor, but my dad thought I'd been shot. So he ran out, and the army by this stage were in the street, and he'd got into one of the tanks. And my mother ran out. The wee boy down the street said, "They're arresting your husband. You better come." So my mum ran up the street and shouts, "Did anybody see a big fat white man, a white man with a white shirt on, a big fat man with a white shirt on?" And my dad got out of this tank and he went, "Could you not have described me any better than that? Big fat man with a white shirt, But it wasn't. It was just the fright of the noise.
Yeah.
I knew that there was something. And but I mean, the military were in the house that evening and they stayed because I'd heard a louder crack. I knew it wasn't the one that came through the living room. And later on that night, my sister and I went up the stairs and I said, "Look, there's a piece out of Mum's door frame. That wasn't there." And we walked into the room. There was a hole the size of a dinner plate in the window. Goodness. And I said, I knew I'd heard a larger crack. So the military were brought in to check it over and they looked for the bullet because they didn't know who had been shooting at who. So they wanted to find the bullets. And that was okay. They stayed for a while. We went to bed. And, of course, we never slept because that was just you were buzzing because it was just like, we were, 11 or 12. We were just like, what happened, And my dad went out to work. He was on a dawn shift. And my mum, the doors, bang, 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 bang. And these 2 fellas were at the door. And my mum opened the door and he says, "In the name of the IRA, we're taking over your house." And she says, "Get to blazes." She says, "I know your mother. Get home. I know your mother. You're taking over nothing. I know your mother." Which was the catchphrase, because everybody knew everybody's mother, and throwing stones. "I know your mother. Put that stone down away home." And that was that was to somebody else, but that was just, I was too young to realise the immediate danger of that or what actually could have happened, to me. So
I've heard these stories before, and I think when you said at the very start that your parents were the bravest people that you know, when you think about that, my gran standing in front of these men and saying, "I know your mother," away you go. I've got kids in the house here and they're not getting in, basically.
That's a lot of stuff happening
really
in
brave.
a very short period of time.
Really brave.
Yeah. So, but it was, growing up where we grew up, like I say, you knew everybody. Everybody knew you. Even our dogs had surnames, So, and that's just the way. It was a very close-knit.
Yeah.
During the Troubles, I think the communities they had to bond together to protect each other and to survive.
Was it important to go back and kind of rewrite a bit of that history then for you? Was that intentional or was that just a nice outcome from going back and doing things differently?
I lost my father died when I was 16. Mm-hmm. He was actually helping people get off a bus that had an incendiary device on it. And it went off and he took a heart attack and died. He was 53. So we lost him very early on. It was 77, the beginning of 77, we lost him. And my family scattered to the four winds then. I have brothers and sisters in Canada and Australia. So when I went and my sister went to Kent, my mother was basically there on her own. Now, she had sisters and brothers at that time, and she came to visit us, and she went to Canada and she went to Australia. But as she got older and not able to travel, I did most of the travelling home to visit her, as did my sister. So we weren't able to do the sort, as I said before, the things that people would normally do on tours. And my mother got to the stage where she was too old to do those things, and she never really ventured off her own road, you know. So going home, I was in two minds about it, if I'm honest, and Maeve had already booked it. And I thought, I really don't know how I'm going to feel about this, because my mum's not there now. So am I going to enjoy this? Am I going to? And I did. I actually did enjoy it. And it did close a lot of doors for me, learning about things that I didn't know when I'd grown up, you know. And so I did. It helped.
And I think as well, we did a lot of learning from the other side as well.
We did.
Which
you
know, because, you know, we grew up Catholic, so we learnt a lot from the other side. The Crumlin Road jail tour was by a former
loyalist prisoner,
which was absolutely fascinating and very funny and very off the cuff. It was a brilliant tour. He was lovely.
Yeah, he was very good.
Really interesting to sort of hear another side of the conflict. That was really
because
good.
he was telling us too that the phrase "money for old rope," right? Well, he said when that prison, I don't know, he could have been pulling my leg or whatever, but he said when the women, there was men, women and children were brought to that prison in the 1800s, and the men were put out to hard labour, breaking up the bricks and the stones and whatever. The boys would maybe go out and sell that outside to make money for the prisoners. The women were given rope, and they had to unwind that down into like a thread.
Right.
And their fingers would bleed and coarse, he says. And that's where you get money for old rope, because they used to sell it.
Yeah.
That was the saying. So I don't know whether that happened actually from that, or whether it was just that's what happened in every prison. I don't know. But it was really good. It was fascinating to sort of hear the stories that come out of that prison, you know. And
so I guess the big question then, and obviously you've been kind enough to share some pretty strong memories, and I'm sure that's going to really help a lot of people. People out there are going through all sorts of different trauma, right?
Yeah.
And I guess they'd be really interested to hear what your advice, and maybe not advice, but what your thoughts are around where you are today versus that journey that you've been on with those very traumatic events. Let's face it, very, very traumatic. And any kind of tips around, you know, being patient or being kind to yourself, or revisiting the places with a different perspective, or you know, anything that you think you've learned that you would offer others as something they might consider.
well, like I say, over the years, talking about it has been my therapy. And I would say to anybody that is going through some sort of trauma in their lives, if they can, even if it's talking to yourself in a mirror in the bathroom, talk to somebody, you know, because you can't, I mean, going back to Belfast as a tourist now, because I don't have family there anymore, I was able to pinpoint different places and say, oh, look, you know, that's the place I used to go, or that's the place, whatever. And I think if you just try and talk about things that happened, even if you don't think they're relevant to what is going on just now, something has happened in your past life. Like me, I didn't realise how much the troubles impacted me as a child. You know, I was a child. I didn't have any different upbringing up in childhood as any other kid. I skipped in the street. I climbed, you know, I went to the park. But it was our park. It wasn't somewhere else in the city, or I wasn't allowed to explore those avenues, you know. And then when I got older, you got a bit afraid to sort of trip outside your own territory, what was going to happen. And then you got a wee bit braver, and you did. And my mother and father didn't know. But no, I would say definitely. And the easiest way for me to get through it was talking about it.
Talk and share. Yeah.
Talking and share your stories.
And laughing.
And laugh, yeah. Laughter is the best medicine for anything. And I know talking about the troubles, people think, how can you laugh about that? How can you... But there's a part of you has to.
Yeah, it's a coping mechanism as well, isn't it?
It's the same with anybody going through anything, an illness, a diagnosis of something horrible. You know, it's anything at all. You know, it's... And I know there's other traumas out there that can't be as easily talked about. But just bite the bullet, excuse the pun, and just talk to somebody.
I love that. Just talk to yourself in the mirror.
Yeah,
right?
absolutely.
Even you don't have to share it with anyone.
No,
right?
it's the best person to talk to because they'll listen. They won't answer you back.
Yeah.
You know, so and you can talk about what you want to say to yourself or what you would like to say to that person. You know, that's either hurt you or a person has helped you. You know, and you're able then to say to them what. Yeah. And
that's a
Nobody
lovely bit of advice and a lovely place to end.
Yes,
I think.
absolutely. And I feel that we got away quite lucky because normally when we give Mum a microphone, she starts to sing. Jolene is her country classic. So thank you, Mum.
Well, you stood on my toes today and stopped me from doing it. You know.
Thank you very much, Mum, for coming in to join us.
You're very
on
welcome.
The podcast.
No, I hope it's helped and I haven't blabbed on.
No.
I hope I've made sense.
You have,
You
and
have
it will
indeed.
definitely help people,
So
so thank you.
Thank you very much.